On May 7, 1915, RMS Lusitania, bound for the city of Liverpool from New York City, was torpedoed and sunk by German U-boat U-20. A few seconds after the torpedo strike, another second explosion ripped through the ship from an unknown source.
For decades, countless theories have tried to explain the second explosion aboard the Lusitania, yet none of them were ever confirmed. They all remained speculation, lacking any direct evidence. That only changed when research teams deployed unmanned submersible technology to the decaying hull on the seafloor. There, among twisted steel plates and collapsed cargo holds, the cameras captured traces that did not appear in any official record, and those seemingly small details were enough to undermine the entire story the public had believed for more than a century about the most controversial shipwreck of World War I. The attack that changed history. On May 7, 1915, off the southern coast of Ireland, the passenger liner RMS Lusitania was nearing the final stretch of its voyage from New York to Liverpool. On deck, passengers believed they were only a few hours away from seeing land. None of them imagined that the massive ship had already fallen into the sights of a silent predator beneath the surface. The First World War had entered its second year. Germany had declared the waters around Britain a war zone, where any vessel could be attacked without warning. Yet for many people in Lusitania, that announcement felt like distant news. Few believed that a ship filled with women, children, and travelers could ever become a target. But below, hidden in the cold water, the German submarine U-20 was quietly trailing Lusitania. Through the periscope, the dark hull of the giant liner appeared clearly. To U-20, this was no longer a civilian voyage. It was a military target moving directly through a declared war zone. At 2:10 p.m., a torpedo was launched. It left a long trail of white bubbles as it raced toward the Lusitania. Several passengers noticed a strange line in the water, but none of them understood that within seconds, history was about to change. The first explosion struck sharply on the starboard side. The ship shuddered, passengers lost their balance, and many were thrown to the floor. Those closest to the impact said it felt as if the deck had been lifted from beneath their feet. Within moments, the Lusitania began to list. Lifeboats on the starboard side tore loose, while those on the port side hung uselessly in the air and could not be lowered. From that moment on, everything unfolded in chaos and desperation. There were screams, groaning steel, and the roar of water rushing in. Only 18 minutes after the initial strike, the Lusitania, nearly 240 meters long and one of Europe's most advanced ships, disappeared beneath the Atlantic. Of the 1,959 people on board, 1,198 died, including 128 American citizens. The loss stunned both Britain and the United States. Newspapers called it an act of slaughter, and immediately the Lusitania became a symbol of the brutality of submarine warfare. Public opinion in America began shifting toward the possibility of entering the war. Yet amid all the outrage, one detail became the center of more than a century of debate. It was the second explosion aboard Lusitania. The mystery of the second explosion and the hidden cargo. Right after the Lusitania sank, reports from survivors and rescue officers all mentioned one troubling detail. A second explosion occurred only a few seconds after the torpedo strike, but it was stronger and seemed to come from deep inside the ship. The scale of the destruction suggested this was not a normal reaction for a passenger liner hit by a single torpedo. Its characteristics quickly attracted the attention of engineers and historians. According to the official cargo manifest, Lusitania carried only familiar civilian goods: cheese, canned meat, furs, and 4,200 cases of rifle cartridges. The British government insisted that this type of ammunition could not produce a major internal blast. Yet the speed at which the ship sank contradicted that explanation. A vessel nearly 240 meters long, equipped with multiple watertight compartments, should not have gone down in 18 minutes from a single external hit. In this climate of doubt, conspiracy theories emerged almost immediately. commentators and independent analysts accused Britain of using the passenger liner to smuggle military supplies, turning civilians into human shields to conceal the shipment of wartime materials. Some suggested that the cargo hold may have contained artillery shells or high explosives, items completely absent from the manifest. What kept these suspicions alive was the British government's response. All documents related to Lusitania's cargo were sealed for decades and kept away from public access. This prevented researchers from independently verifying the information and only fueled more questions. If the cargo was truly harmless, why hide it for so long? Another complication came from the ship's classification. Lusitania was officially registered as an armed merchant cruiser. Although it never carried heavy guns in practice, this classification caused Germany to regard it as a legitimate military target under wartime rules. This pushed the sinking into a gray area where the lines between civilian and military were no longer clear. Within this context, many experts came to consider one explanation the most plausible. If the cargo hold contained unstable explosives, flammable materials, or ammunition packed incorrectly, the violent shock of the torpedo could have triggered a chain reaction. This would explain why the second explosion was far more powerful and why Lusitania sank with such shocking speed. All these clues, the unclear manifest, the sealed records, and the ship's dual-purpose designation lead to the same central question. What exactly was inside Lusitania's cargo hold? And did those materials cause the second explosion? To answer this, researchers needed to do something that had long been considered impossible. Reach the cargo hold itself, deep on the ocean floor, where the truth behind a century-old mystery might still remain. The journey to reach the wreck and the technical challenges. Reaching the Lusitania on the seafloor was anything but simple. Although the ship rests at a depth of only about 91 meters, well within the limits of modern technology, its location lies in one of the harshest diving environments off the coast of Ireland. The area is swept by powerful tidal currents that can push survey equipment off course, with even the slightest change in flow. The seabed is covered with suspended sediment that clouds the water and reduces visibility to almost nothing whenever the surface is disturbed. Low temperatures and sudden cold surges add further danger, turning any manual attempt to reach the wreck into a highly risky undertaking. The condition of the ship itself made the challenge far more complicated. After more than a century underwater, many steel walls had corroded to the point where even a minor touch could cause them to collapse. Decks and passageways had become unstable, forming dark, fragile voids that could give way at any moment. For divers, entering these spaces was like stepping into a decaying structure where a single mistake could trap them inside. Another obstacle came from the fishing nets that had accumulated around the wreck over decades. They draped over much of the exterior like invisible snares and threatened to entangle any submersible that approached. Even a slight entanglement was enough to halt a mission or immobilize a robot. Because of these conditions, for most of the 20th century, every explanation for the second explosion remained theoretical. No one could get close enough to the cargo hold, the suspected source of the blast, to verify any detail. Direct access was nearly impossible. Only when remotely operated underwater vehicles, or ROVs, became powerful enough did a path into the Lusitania finally open. ROVs could operate for long hours at depth without exposing human divers to physiological risks. They could withstand strong currents, illuminate dark interiors with high-powered lights, and slip through narrow openings no person could enter. High-resolution cameras recorded every detail of warped steel, while sonar mapped the interior layout when the water turned opaque. Robotic arms allowed sampling without further damaging the already weakened structure. Thanks to ROVs, for the first time in more than a century, maritime archaeologists were able to observe the Lusitania's cargo hold directly. They no longer had to rely solely on survivor accounts or theoretical models. The footage allowed them to compare cracks, bent metal, material residues, and remaining traces with what was known, providing the first physical clues to the true nature of the second explosion. What the ROV recorded inside the cargo hold. When the ROV entered the forward cargo hold, the light from its lamps revealed objects that had not been seen clearly since 1915. The investigation was no longer speculation. What appeared on camera offered the first visual evidence capable of rewriting the entire story of the second explosion. Just beneath the sediment lay brass shell casings scattered among the debris. Some matched the size of the rifle cartridges listed in official records, but many were noticeably larger, indicating ammunition that had never appeared on any manifest. On the steel walls of the cargo hold, the camera captured patches of a silver-colored substance. As the ROV moved closer, their reflective quality revealed that it was aluminum, present both as fragments and as compacted powder that had solidified after a century underwater. The steel plates around the cargo area showed a striking pattern. Many sections were bent outward rather than inward. This feature is typical of an explosion that originates inside a confined space, not an external hit like a torpedo strike. In the collapsed areas, the metal twisted into unusual shapes, evidence that a strong internal force had spread through the enclosed compartments. The ROV also recorded dark brown deposits clinging to the metal surfaces, likely the remnants of burned material or explosive compounds, although laboratory analysis would be required for confirmation. Even deeper in the hold, the ROV found large voids, gaps where storage containers had once existed but were now completely destroyed. Scattered pieces of wood, metal fasteners, and thin metal fragments suggested that the original crates had been shattered by a force far greater than simple corrosion. Taken together, these images formed a clear picture. The cargo hold had been torn apart from within, and several materials found there did not match the official cargo list. Yet the footage alone could not answer the most important question: why did these materials produce such a powerful internal blast? The second explosion's mystery. To understand what happened, researchers compared the footage recorded by the ROVs with controlled explosion models created in laboratory settings. A clearer picture of the second explosion began to emerge. There was no evidence that the blast came from a single source. Instead, every clue pointed to a chain of rapid reactions in which several technical factors interacted within seconds of the torpedo strike. The starting point was the shockwave produced when the torpedo hit the starboard side. The force traveled quickly through the interior and violently disturbed the entire cargo hold. At that moment, the mixture of materials inside the hold became highly unstable. Metal dust lifted into the air, temperatures spiked, and internal pressure rose sharply. In these conditions, aluminum powder, which is extremely combustible when dispersed into fine particles, could have created a phenomenon similar to a dust explosion. Combined with the heat generated by the torpedo impact, this mixture may have produced a sudden wave of pressure strong enough to push the steel plates outward in the exact pattern observed on the wreck. Immediately after this, the ammunition stored in the hold, particularly its propellant charges, became the next component in the chain. Under high heat and pressure, the propellant could ignite in small, sequential bursts, creating a cascading effect that amplified the initial force. This series of reactions matched the twisted, irregular deformation found inside the cargo compartments. Another factor that could have accelerated the chain reaction was the ship's high-pressure steam system. If steam pipes were damaged by the torpedo strike, sudden bursts of steam would have increased the pressure inside the confined space and helped drive the explosion through the hold. When these elements combined, dispersed metal dust, rising heat, cascading propellant ignition, and steam pressure, the result was an internal blast far more powerful than the torpedo itself. This immense force caused the ship to list sharply, allowing water to flood the compartments at a rate the watertight bulkheads could not withstand. This sequence of events explains why Lusitania sank in only 18 minutes. But beyond the technical details, the second explosion raises a deeper question. Why did a passenger ship carrying nearly 2,000 civilians have materials aboard that were capable of triggering such a dangerous chain reaction? This question leads back to wartime strategy, sealed records, and the limited transparency that persisted for decades. The legacy of Lusitania and the truth brought to light. Today, the remains of Lusitania lie on their side on the seafloor at a depth of about 91 meters, slowly eroding under the force of the tides. To archaeologists and historians, the wreck is not just rusting steel beneath the Atlantic. It is a war grave filled with questions that remained unanswered for more than a century. Thanks to modern surveys, especially the samples and footage collected by ROVs, our understanding of the 1915 disaster has changed dramatically. Lusitania was not as harmless a passenger ship as wartime propaganda once described. Physical evidence shows that it carried materials consistent with wartime use, and these materials played a crucial role in the chain of reactions that produced the second explosion. This discovery does not diminish the tragedy. Nearly 1,200 people still died in a matter of minutes, but it forces researchers to confront a far more complex reality. In a global conflict, the line between civilian and military assets is often far less clear than the public is led to believe. Lusitania is one of the clearest examples of this blurred boundary. Outwardly, it was a luxury liner, but its design carried the hallmarks of an armed merchant cruiser. Its official cargo manifest did not reflect everything stored in its hold, and the documents related to its shipment were sealed for decades, making any assessment of the sinking incomplete and fueling decades of controversy. Solving the mystery of the second explosion provides a more balanced view. The tragedy was not only the result of an external attack, it was also the outcome of risky strategic decisions made in wartime, when transparency was limited and military advantage sometimes took priority over passenger safety. These revelations are not meant to assign blame to any single nation or individual. Instead, they help reconstruct an event long believed to be well understood, but which in reality was layered with political complexity and suppressed information. The evidence recorded by the ROVs not only clarifies the technical cause of the second explosion, but also highlights how governments manage information during war, an issue that remains relevant today. Although the wreck continues to deteriorate, it stands as a stark reminder of how fragile the truth can be in times of conflict. Recent expeditions have brought us closer than ever to fully understanding what happened on May 7, 1915. And even if a few details remain uncertain, the overall picture is now clearer. The second explosion is the key to explaining why Lusitania sank so quickly, and the ship's true nature was far more complex than what the public was once allowed to believe. The long search for answers beneath the ocean has finally closed many decades of doubt and left us with a message that never loses its relevance. In war, the greatest dangers are not always found on the battlefield. Sometimes they lie in what is deliberately kept hidden.